She had one rule: never back down. He had one weakness: her fire. Anne Clark thought screaming at the arrogant stranger blocking her parking spot was just venting frustration. A bad day, a forgettable encounter. She was wrong. That stranger was William Moretti, a name whispered in boardrooms and back alleys alike. A man who doesn't forget, a man who shouldn't have noticed her at all. But he did. Now Anne's carefully ordinary life is unraveling. Coincidences that aren't coincidences. A presence she can feel but can't prove. And a pull toward danger she knows she should resist but can't. William told himself it was curiosity, control, strategy. He was lying. Because for the first time in his ruthlessly controlled existence, someone, has cracked through his armor. And in his world, weakness is fatal. In a game where power is everything and trust doesn't exist, their collision will ignite a fire neither can control. The only question is, who breaks first? Ready for a story where one wrong move changes everything? Hit subscribe and comment where you're watching from. This is a ride you won't forget. Anne Clark had exactly 14 minutes to park, sprint to the elevator, change her coffee-stained blouse, and make it to the staff meeting that would determine whether she kept her marketing position at Hartley & Coiser. 14 minutes between employed and unemployed, between rent paid and eviction. The universe apparently had other plans. A sleek black Mercedes sat diagonally across her designated parking spot, number 47, the only spot she paid extra for in this cramped underground garage because it was close to the elevator and because, damn it, she deserved one predictable thing in her chaotic life. Anne's hands tightened on the steering wheel of her decade-old Honda. The leather was cracked under her palms, worn smooth by years of gripping too hard during traffic jams and life's small indignities. Her jaw clenched. The throb of a headache pulsed behind her left eye, the kind that started as irritation and bloomed into full-blown rage when pushed. Today she was already pushed. She honked once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession, the sound echoing off concrete pillars in the dimly lit garage. Nothing. No movement from inside the Mercedes. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered, checking her phone. 12 minutes now. Anne threw her car into park, grabbed her purse, and stepped out. Her heels clicked against the oil-stained concrete, each step sharp and purposeful. The garage smelled of gasoline and damp cement, that particular underground odor that always made her feel like she was descending into some urban underworld. She marched up to the driver's window and rapped on it with her knuckles. Hard. "Excuse me, you're in my spot." The window descended with a soft mechanical purr, so smooth it was almost insolent. The man inside looked up at her with eyes the color of smoke and steel. Grey, cold, assessing. His face was all sharp angles, a jaw that could cut glass, high cheekbones, a mouth set in a line that suggested he rarely smiled and never apologized. Dark hair, perfectly styled despite the early hour. A suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary, maybe 2 months. He studied her with the kind of leisure that made her skin prickle, as though time bent around him, as though he'd never been rushed a day in his life. "Your spot?" His voice was low, smooth, with an edge that reminded her of expensive whiskey and dark promises. "Yes, my spot. Number 47, the one you're currently occupying." Anne pointed at the faded number painted on the concrete. Her heart hammered against her ribs, adrenaline sharpening every sense. She could smell his cologne now, something woodsy and clean, utterly out of place in this grimy garage. One dark eyebrow lifted fractionally. I wasn't aware parking spots came with such passionate guardians. Was he mocking her? "Look, I don't have time for this. I'm late, you're in my spot, and you need to move now." She punctuated the last word with another rap on his car door. Something shifted in his expression, so subtle she almost missed it. A flicker of something that might have been surprise or interest or both. His gaze traveled from her face down to her hand on his car, then back up to meet her eyes. The attention felt physical, like fingertips trailing across her skin. "You're brave," he said softly. "Or foolish. I haven't decided which." Anne felt a chill despite the stuffy garage air. There was something in his tone that didn't match the mundane situation, an undercurrent of warning, like watching storm clouds gather on a clear day. But she was out of time and out of patience. "I'm neither. I'm late. So unless you want me to call a tow truck, I suggest you back your fancy car up and find another spot." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Really looked, as though memorizing every detail. The way her blonde hair had escaped its ponytail in frustrated wisps, the coffee stain blooming across her cream blouse, the defiant tilt of her chin despite the exhaustion shadowing her blue eyes. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth curved. Not quite a smile. Something darker. "Anne Clark," he said. Her blood went cold. "How do you—" "Unit 802. Moved in 3 years ago. Marketing coordinator. Coffee black from the shop on 5th Street every morning at 7:15. You take the stairs when the elevator's crowded, and you always carry too many grocery bags because you hate making 2 trips." The garage seemed to contract around her, air thinning. What the hell? He shifted in his seat and she caught a glimpse of the interior. Leather so supple it looked liquid, chrome details, a dashboard that belonged in a spaceship. Power and money, wrapped in German engineering. "My name is William Moretti," he said, as though that explained everything. It didn't. But something in the way he said it, the quiet certainty, the weight behind those syllables, made her stomach drop. "I don't care who you are. Move. Your car." "I bought this building yesterday," William continued, ignoring her completely. "All 42 units, the parking garage, the lobby, the rooftop garden you like to hide in on Sunday mornings, everything." The words landed like stones in water, each one creating ripples that spread and spread until they drowned out everything else. "You're lying." "The paperwork cleared at 4 p.m. I signed 23 documents, transferred $12 million, and became your new landlord." His grey eyes held hers. "So technically, Miss Clark, this is my parking spot. They're all my parking spots now." Anne's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Heat flooded her cheeks, embarrassment mixing with anger in a toxic cocktail. "So what, you just showed up to gloat? To put the peasants in their place?" "I showed up," he said, his voice dropping even lower, "because I wanted to see who lived in my newest acquisition. Due diligence. At 7 in the morning in my parking spot. Technically—" "Oh, shut up with your technicalities." The words burst out before she could stop them. "You know what? Fine. You're the landlord. Congratulations. You win, but you're still an arrogant jerk." She spun on her heel and stalked back toward her car, fury making her movements jerky. Behind her, she heard the Mercedes door open. "Miss Clark." She didn't turn around. "What now?" "You're still late." Anne stopped, her hand on her car door. She could feel him behind her, not close but present, taking up space in a way that made the garage feel smaller. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "Thank you so much for that observation," she said through gritted teeth. "I'll move." She turned slowly. William stood beside his Mercedes, hands in his pockets, watching her with that same unsettling intensity. In the fluorescent garage lighting, he looked like something carved from marble, beautiful and cold and utterly untouchable. Why? His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, something that made her breath catch despite her anger. "Because you asked," he said simply. Then he slid back into his car. The engine purred to life with a sound like liquid silk, and he reversed out of her spot with infuriating precision. But instead of leaving, he pulled into an empty spot 3 spaces down, and got out again. Anne's heartbeat kicked up for reasons that had nothing to do with being late. "What are you doing?" William walked toward her, each step measured and deliberate. He moved like someone who'd never been told no, who'd never had to rush, who occupied space with the confidence of ownership, which, she realized with a sinking feeling, he literally did now. "Making sure you're not late," he said, stopping 2 feet away. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Close enough that his cologne wrapped around her like smoke. "It would reflect poorly on my property if my tenants suffered employment issues." "How considerate," Anne managed, hating how breathless she sounded. "I can be," William agreed, "when properly motivated." The air between them felt charged, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Anne couldn't look away from his eyes, couldn't decode what she saw there. It wasn't kindness, but it wasn't cruelty either. It was interest, sharp and focused, and somehow dangerous. "I need to go," she whispered. "Then go." But neither of them moved. The distant rumble of another car entering the garage broke the moment. Anne sucked in a breath, stepped back, and clutched her keys so tightly they bit into her palm. "Stay away from me," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. William's smile was slow, knowing, and made her stomach flip. "We live in the same building now, Miss Clark. That might prove difficult." He turned and walked back to his Mercedes with that same predatory grace, leaving Anne standing alone beside her car, heart racing and hands trembling and mind spinning with one undeniable truth. She'd just made an enemy of the most dangerous man in the city, or worse. She'd made him curious. Anne made it to the meeting with 45 seconds to spare, her backup blouse wrinkled but coffee-free, her composure held together with sheer willpower, and 3 deep breaths in the elevator. She didn't hear a word about quarterly projections. Her mind kept circling back to the garage, to grey eyes and that voice like smoke, to the way William Moretti had said her name as though he already owned it. "You're brave or foolish?" I haven't decided which. Neither had she. By lunch, the news had spread through her building's tenant chat like wildfire. New ownership. Immediate changes pending. Emergency meetings scheduled for tomorrow evening in the building's community room. Anne's phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. Some panicked, others cautiously optimistic, most just confused. "Mrs. Chen, Unit 512. Do you think he'll raise rent?" "Marcus, Unit 714. Who is this Moretti guy anyway?" "Sarah, Unit 306. I heard he's connected to the syndicate. My cousin's boyfriend said the name Moretti is tied to the Valenti family." Anne's coffee turned to acid in her stomach. She switched to her browser, fingers flying across her phone screen. William Moretti. The results loaded. CEO of Moretti Holdings. Real estate magnate, philanthropist. A black and white photo from a charity gala showed him in a tuxedo, looking like he'd been born wearing it. A blonde woman in diamonds on his arm. The caption mentioned the notoriously private businessman and his extensive portfolio of luxury properties. Nothing about the syndicate, nothing questionable, but also nothing personal. No interviews, no social media. No glimpse behind the carefully constructed facade. Anne dug deeper. 3 pages in, she found an article from 5 years ago, archived from a business journal. Moretti Empire expands into urban renewal, savior or conqueror. The piece detailed William's pattern of buying struggling properties, renovating them, and flipping them for massive profits, all technically legal, mostly celebrated, but with whispers of displaced communities and aggressive acquisition tactics. Her building wasn't struggling. It was old, yes, with temperamental plumbing and an elevator that groaned like it was arthritic, but it was home to teachers and artists and retirees on fixed incomes, people who couldn't afford to be displaced. "This is my parking spot. They're all my parking spots now." Anne's jaw tightened. At 6 p.m. she headed home, her mind already drafting what she'd say at tomorrow's meeting. Someone needed to stand up for the tenants. Someone needed to demand transparency. The elevator dinged on the 8th floor, and there, leaning against the wall directly across from her apartment door, was William Moretti. He'd lost the suit jacket. His white dress shirt was rolled up to his forearms, revealing tanned skin, and the kind of lean muscle that came from deliberate exercise, not vanity. He looked completely at ease, as though loitering in hallways was his preferred evening activity. Anne froze, keys halfway to her lock. "Breaking and entering now?" she asked, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "I own the building," William replied calmly. "It's technically impossible for me to break and enter my own property. My apartment isn't your property. The walls around it are." His gaze tracked her movement as she walked past him to her door, maintaining maximum distance in the narrow hallway. "We need to talk." "No, we really don't." "Anne." The way he said her first name without permission, with a familiarity he hadn't earned, made her spin around. "It's Miss Clark to you." Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe. Formal. "I like it." "I don't care what you like." Anne jammed her key into the lock. "I care that you're harassing me outside my own home. If I were harassing you, you'd know." His voice was still calm, still controlled, but there was steel underneath now. "This is a conversation. One I strongly suggest you allow." Anne's hand hesitated on the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at her to go inside, lock the door, pretend this wasn't happening. But she'd spent the entire day digging into William Moretti's business practices, and if there was one consistent thread through every article, every forum post, every carefully neutral interview, it was that he always got what he wanted. Men like him didn't give up. They escalated. Better to face this now on her terms than later on his. She turned, arms crossed. "Talk then, you have 5 minutes." William pushed off the wall with a fluid grace that reminded her of how predators moved, economical, purposeful, never wasting energy. He closed the distance between them until he was standing close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Your lease expires in 3 months, he said. Anne's stomach dropped, but she kept her face neutral. I'm aware. I'm offering you a new one, same unit, same terms, 3-year guarantee. She blinked. That was not what she'd expected. Why? Because you interest me. The honesty of it stunned her into silence. William's grey eyes held hers, and she realized with a start that this close, they weren't entirely grey. There were flecks of blue in them, like ice fractured by pressure. That's not a reason, Anne managed. It's the only reason I need. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. Most people, when faced with power, react in predictable ways. They cower, or they ingratiate themselves, or they calculate how to use the situation to their advantage. You shouted at me. You were in my parking spot. I've been in 100 people's parking spots, metaphorically and literally. You're the first one brave enough or foolish enough to call me an arrogant jerk to my face. Anne's breath caught. Is this some kind of game to you? No. His voice dropped lower, rougher. It's the first real thing that's happened to me in years. The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. Anne saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not vulnerability exactly, but a crack in the armor. A glimpse of the man beneath the empire. I don't need your charity, she said quietly. It's not charity. It's a trade. William reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. Sign the lease. In exchange, you help me. Help you what? Understand this building. Its people. What they need, what they fear. His jaw tightened fractionally. I'm very good at numbers, Miss Clark. Assets and liabilities. Return on investment. But I'm told I'm lacking in the human element. Anne almost laughed. You want me to teach you empathy? I want you to translate. He held out the document. I have plans for this building, good plans that will increase property values and improve quality of life. But if I implement them my way, I'll turn into the villain every article claims I am. I don't want that. She stared at the lease, then at him. Why should I believe you? Because if I wanted to destroy this place, I would have started demolition yesterday. I have the permits, the contractors, the capital. William's expression was unreadable. I chose to wait. That should tell you something. It did. But Anne wasn't sure what. And if I refuse, then your lease expires in 3 months and you'll be subject to whatever standard renewal terms I implement. He paused. Which, statistically, will be 30% higher than current rates. That's coercion. It's business. But his voice lacked conviction. Anne's mind raced. The smart move was to walk away, to refuse to be bought or manipulated. But the smart move left her homeless in 3 months, and it abandoned every other tenant in this building to whatever fate William decided. At least this way, she'd have a voice, a seat at the table, even if that table belonged to the devil. I want it in writing, she said finally. Every promise, every plan, complete transparency. William's smile was slow and satisfied, like he'd won something far more significant than her cooperation. Deal. He handed her the document and a pen, black, expensive, the kind that made signatures feel permanent. Anne skimmed the lease. It was exactly what he'd said. Same terms, 3-year guarantee, with an addendum at the end about advisory consultation regarding property development. She signed before she could second-guess herself. When she looked up, William was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. One more thing, he said softly. Of course there is. Dinner? Tomorrow night. We'll discuss the building's future. It's necessary. His gaze didn't waver. And it's not a request, Miss Clark. Consider it the first meeting of our new arrangement. Anne wanted to refuse, wanted to throw the lease back in his face and tell him exactly where he could shove his dinner invitation. But she'd already signed the paper, already made her deal with the wolf. Fine, she bit out, but somewhere public. William's smile turned predatory. Afraid to be alone with me? Cautious, Anne corrected. There's a difference. Is there? He leaned in fractionally, close enough that she caught the scent of his cologne again, felt the heat radiating from his body. I'll pick you up at 7. Then he was gone, striding down the hallway toward the elevator with that same confident gait, leaving Anne standing outside her apartment with a signed lease in one hand and the distinct feeling that she'd just sealed a fate far more complicated than a simple contract. Inside her apartment, she locked the door, pressed her back against it, and tried to steady her racing heart. William Moretti was dangerous. That much was obvious. What terrified her was the tiny, treacherous part of her mind that whispered, dangerous didn't always mean wrong. and she was very afraid she'd just invited the danger in. Anne changed outfits 4 times before settling on a simple black dress, professional enough to maintain boundaries, elegant enough to hold her own across from a man who probably ate at restaurants with Michelin stars. She refused to admit she cared what William thought, but she also refused to show up looking unprepared. At 6:58 p.m., she stood in her apartment's small entryway, clutching her purse and giving herself a stern talking to via her reflection in the hallway mirror. This is business. Just business. He's your landlord. This is about protecting your neighbors. It's not about the way his eyes seem to see straight through you. It's definitely not about how your pulse jumped when he stood close. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Downstairs. Take your time. Anne frowned. How did he have her number? Then she remembered, I bought this building. He probably had access to every tenant file, every lease application, every scrap of information she'd provided when she'd moved in 3 years ago. The thought should have angered her. Instead, it sent a shiver down her spine. The elevator ride felt interminable. Anne watched the floor numbers descend. 8, 7, 6, each one bringing her closer to a decision she wasn't entirely sure was wise. The fluorescent lights flickered on the 5th floor, same as always. The elevator groaned. Everything was familiar, mundane, normal, except nothing felt normal anymore. The lobby doors slid open, and Anne stopped breathing. William stood near the entrance, bathed in the warm glow of the old brass chandelier that Mrs. Chen had fought to keep when the building's previous owner wanted to modernize. He wore a charcoal suit, perfectly tailored, with a dark shirt open at the collar, formal but not stuffy, powerful but not ostentatious. He looked like money and danger wrapped in Italian wool. His gaze found hers immediately, tracking her movement across the lobby with the focus of someone who missed nothing. Anne felt that look like a physical touch, awareness prickling across her skin. "Miss Clark," William said as she approached, "punctual. I appreciate that." "I value my time," Anne replied coolly. "I assume you value yours, so let's make this efficient." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. Efficient. Yes, that's exactly the word I'd use for tonight. But the way he said it suggested the opposite. He gestured toward the door where, of course, the black Mercedes waited at the curb, illegally parked with the kind of confidence that said, "I don't care about tickets." Anne hesitated. Getting into his car felt like crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. "We could walk," she suggested. "There's a perfectly good Italian place 3 blocks." "We're not going to a perfectly good place." William opened the passenger door, one hand resting on the frame. "We're going to the place." "Pretentious much?" "Honest." His gaze held hers. "I don't do things halfway, Anne." The use of her first name again, deliberate, intimate, presumptuous, sent heat flooding her cheeks. She wanted to correct him, to insist on formality, but something in his expression stopped her. A challenge, maybe. Or a test. Anne slid into the car. The leather enveloped her like a glove, butter soft and faintly warm. The interior smelled of leather and that woodsy cologne and something else. Something uniquely William. The dashboard glowed with soft blue light, technology she didn't recognize and probably couldn't afford if she saved for a decade. William closed her door with a solid final sound, then rounded the car and slid into the driver's seat with fluid grace. The engine purred to life. "Seatbelt," he said quietly. Anne reached for it, suddenly hyper-aware of his proximity in the enclosed space. The car wasn't small, but William's presence made it feel intimate, like they were sharing air, sharing space in a way that went beyond the physical. She clicked the belt into place. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere you'll either love or hate." William pulled smoothly into traffic. "I haven't decided which." "That's not ominous at all." His laugh was low, genuine. "You're refreshingly direct. Most people dance around what they really think." "I don't have the energy to dance," Anne said, watching the city lights blur past her window. "And I don't have the luxury of subtlety. So yes, I'm direct. It saves time." "Does it?" William glanced at her, one hand relaxed on the steering wheel. "In my experience, directness usually complicates things. People don't know how to handle honesty. Then people are cowards. Or they're cautious. There's power in what we don't say." Anne turned to face him fully. In profile, his face was all sharp lines and shadows, beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. "Is that how you operate? Power through silence?" "I operate through control." His jaw tightened fractionally. "Everything else is noise." "Must be lonely," Anne said before she could stop herself. William's hands flexed on the steering wheel, the only sign she'd struck something true. Loneliness is a choice. I choose power instead. Those aren't mutually exclusive, aren't they? He shot her a look that made her breath catch. You think someone like me gets to have both? The question hung heavy between them, loaded with implications Anne wasn't ready to unpack. The car turned onto a tree-lined street she didn't recognize, slowing before a building with no sign, no obvious entrance, just a discreet doorway framed by ivy and soft lighting. William parked, killed the engine, and turned to face her fully. Last chance to change your mind, he said quietly. About dinner? About all of it. His grey eyes searched hers. This arrangement, working with me. Once we walk through that door, things change. Anne's heart hammered. Change how? People will see us together, they'll assume things. His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth before returning to her eyes. In my world, perception is reality, and being associated with me makes you a target. A target for what? William's expression turned grim. Questions, speculation, people who want to use you to get to me. He paused. Or people who want to hurt me. The confession was so raw, so unexpected, that Anne forgot to breathe. This wasn't a seduction or a power play. This was a warning, a real one. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. Because you deserve to know what you're walking into. William's voice was rough, strained. And because if something happened to you because of me, I'd... He stopped abruptly, jaw clenching. Anne reached out without thinking, her hand covering his where it rested on the console between them. His skin was warm, solid, real under her palm. I'm not afraid, she said. It was a lie. She was terrified, but not of him, of herself, of the way his honesty cracked something open inside her, of the way she wanted to smooth away the tension in his face, to understand what made a man this powerful, also this alone. William stared at her hand on his like it was something foreign, something he didn't know how to interpret. Then, slowly, he turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. The touch was electric. You should be, he said softly. Afraid. Of me. Of this. Probably, Anne agreed. Neither of them moved. The moment stretched, suspended, the city humming around them while they sat in silence, hands joined, both balanced on the edge of something neither could name. Finally, William squeezed her hand once, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache, and pulled away. Come on, he said, his voice carefully neutral again. Dinner's getting cold. They didn't speak as they walked to the unmarked door. William pressed a button. A camera above the frame swiveled to face them. 3 seconds later, the lock clicked open. Inside was a different world. Soft lighting, cream walls, the low murmur of conversation, and the clink of crystal. A woman in an elegant black suit appeared immediately, her face lighting up when she saw William. Mr. Moretti, your table is ready. They were led through a dining room that screamed old money and exclusivity, no more than a dozen tables, all occupied by people wearing jewelry that could fund Anne's entire life. She suddenly felt woefully underdressed despite her black dress. Their table was in a private corner, candlelit and intimate, with a view of a small garden visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. William held out her chair. Anne sat, hyper-aware of his hands briefly brushing her shoulders. Wine? He asked once they were both settled. Something strong, Anne muttered. His smile was quick, genuine, honest. The sommelier appeared as if summoned, and William ordered in flawless Italian, not to show off, Anne realized, but because this was his world. A world where language and wine and power flowed like water. When they were alone again, Anne leaned forward. Okay, talk. What are your plans for the building? William's expression shifted, becoming businesslike. Structural upgrades, new elevator system, updated plumbing, energy-efficient windows, green rooftop expansion. That sounds expensive. It is. So rent increases. Not necessarily. He paused as their wine arrived, waiting until the sommelier departed before continuing. If I do this right, property value increases, which benefits me long-term. I can absorb the costs through tax incentives and future equity. Anne studied him. Why do I sense there's a but coming? But, William continued, his gaze sharp, I need tenant cooperation. No complaints to housing authorities, no bad press. Complete trust that I'm improving their lives, not disrupting them. That's where I come in. Yes, He leaned back, swirling his wine. You translate me to them. You help me understand what they actually need versus what I think they need. You're the bridge. And if your plans hurt people anyway? William's jaw tightened. Then you tell me and we adjust. Just like that? Just like that. His eyes met hers. I know what people think of me. I'm the cold-hearted businessman who raises neighborhoods for profit. And maybe I was once. But I don't want that anymore. Why not? The question slipped out, too personal, too probing, but William didn't deflect. Because my father built an empire on fear, he said quietly, and when he died, no one mourned him. They celebrated. And I realized I was becoming him. Powerful, feared and utterly alone. His fingers tightened around the wine stem. I don't want that to be my legacy. Anne's breath caught. Beneath the armor, beneath the ruthless exterior, was a man trying to be better than his inheritance, trying and terrified of failing. Then don't be him, she said softly. Be better. That simple? No. Anne shook her head. It's probably the hardest thing you'll ever do. But you asked me to be honest, so here it is. You have the power to change lives, really change them. You can be the landlord who cares or the one who destroys. That choice is yours. William stared at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten. You really believe that? I have to, Anne said. Otherwise, what's the point? Something in his expression cracked, not broke, but softened, like ice beginning to thaw. He reached across the table, his hand hovering over hers. May I? He asked, voice rough. Anne nodded, not trusting herself to speak. His fingers closed over hers, warm and solid and impossibly gentle for a man with so much controlled power. Thank you, William said. For what? For seeing me. His grey eyes held hers, unguarded for the first time. Not the empire, not the reputation, just me. Anne's heart squeezed painfully. This was dangerous territory. This was where professional boundaries blurred and feelings took root, and everything got complicated, but she didn't pull her hand away. Tell me something true, she whispered. Something no one else knows. William's thumb traced slow circles on her palm, the touch sending shivers up her arm. I'm terrified, he admitted, of failing, of becoming my father, of being alone forever because I don't know how to be anything other than what I was trained to be. He paused. And I'm terrified of you. Me? Because you make me want things I can't have. Normalcy. Connection. His gaze dropped to their joined hands. Someone who sees me and doesn't flinch. Anne couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of his confession settling between them like a vow. I'm not flinching, she said. William looked up, and the raw need in his eyes nearly undid her. Not yet, he said, but you will. Everyone does. Try me. It was a challenge, a promise. A line crossed, and as William's grip tightened on her hand, as something hungry and desperate and real flickered across his face, Anne realized with startling clarity that she wasn't afraid anymore. She was falling, and it was far too late to stop. Dinner lasted 3 hours. Anne didn't notice when their appetizers arrived, barely tasted the main course that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. She was too lost in the conversation, in the way William's carefully constructed walls crumbled with each glass of wine, each quiet confession, each moment his guard slipped. He told her about growing up in his father's shadow, where weakness was punished and emotion was leveraged to be exploited. About building his empire as armor, only to realize the armor had fused to his skin until he couldn't remember what lay beneath. And Anne found herself confessing too, about her own fears, her desperate need to prove herself after a childhood of being underestimated, about the exhaustion of always being strong, because no one else would be strong for her. You're tired, William observed at one point, his gaze tracing the shadows under her eyes. Constantly, Anne admitted, but stopping feels like giving up. What if stopping felt like breathing instead? The question lodged in her chest, uncomfortable and revealing. When had she last simply breathed without agenda or deadline or consequence? She couldn't remember. By the time they left the restaurant, Anne's walls had cracked as thoroughly as his. The night air was cool against her flushed cheeks, the city reduced to blurred lights and distant sounds, as William drove them back through empty streets. His hand found hers on the console. Neither acknowledged it. Neither pulled away. When they reached her building, William parked, but didn't kill the engine. "I'll walk you up," he said. "That's not necessary. Anne." Her name was rough in his mouth. "Let me." She nodded, throat tight. The lobby was empty, the old chandelier casting everything in sepia tones like a memory already fading. Their footsteps echoed on marble floors. The elevator groaned to life. Inside the confined space, the air felt thick, charged. Anne kept her eyes on the ascending floor numbers, hyper-aware of William beside her. The way he stood too close but not close enough, the way his breathing had changed, the tension radiating from him in waves. 8th floor. The doors slid open. Anne's apartment suddenly felt miles away down the narrow hallway. Each step was measured, deliberate, both of them moving like they were approaching something inevitable and terrifying. She stopped at her door, turned. William stood close enough that she could see the conflicted hunger in his eyes, the muscle jumping in his jaw as he fought some internal battle. "Thank you," Anne whispered. "For tonight. For being honest." "Anne." His voice was strained. "I need you to go inside now." "Why?" "Because if you don't, I'm going to kiss you." The confession was raw, desperate. "And I shouldn't. This is already complicated enough without—" Anne rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The world stopped. For one frozen heartbeat, William went absolutely still. Then his control shattered. His hands cupped her face with devastating gentleness, tilting her head back as he deepened the kiss with a hunger that stole her breath. Anne's fingers clutched his shirt, desperate for anchor. A sensation overwhelmed thought. He tasted like wine and want, like every dangerous decision she'd ever been too smart to make. This was those decisions condensed into a single moment. William kissed like he did everything else, with complete focus, like she was the only thing that existed in his carefully controlled universe. His thumb traced her cheekbone, the touch unbearably tender, even as his mouth claimed hers with barely restrained need. Anne felt herself melting, barriers dissolving, every logical reason this was a terrible idea burning away under the heat of his attention. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, William pressed his forehead to hers. "This changes everything," he whispered against her lips. "I know. Your lease, the building, everything becomes complicated now." "I know," Anne repeated. She didn't care. William's hands trembled slightly where they still cradled her face, the first real sign of lost control she'd seen from him. "I can't promise you easy. My life doesn't allow for easy." "I'm not asking for easy." Anne's fingers tightened in his shirt. "I'm asking for real." His grey eyes searched hers, vulnerable and fierce and terrified. "I don't know how to be real with someone. I don't know how to do this without destroying it. Then we'll figure it out together." She pulled back just enough to meet his gaze fully. "But you don't get to decide for me. You don't get to protect me from yourself by pushing me away. That's my choice." "Anne, do you want this?" she demanded. "Do you want me?" "Yes." The word tore out of him. "God, yes. From the moment you shouted at me in that parking garage, I haven't been able to think about anything else." Anne's heart soared and plummeted simultaneously. "Then stop fighting it." William made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a groan. "You're going to ruin me." "Good," Anne said fiercely. "Maybe you need ruining." He kissed her again, slower this time, thorough, like he was memorizing every contour of her mouth. When he finally pulled back, his expression was equal parts wonder and resignation. "I have to go," he said, though his hands hadn't left her face. "If I stay, I won't leave, and you deserve better than a decision made at midnight in a hallway." Anne wanted to argue, wanted to pull him inside and deal with consequences tomorrow, but she recognized the iron discipline reasserting itself in his posture, saw him rebuilding walls brick by brick, even as he stood there touching her. "Okay," she whispered. William's thumb brushed across her lower lip, a promise and a goodbye. "Sleep. Tomorrow we deal with reality. What about tonight?" Tonight was... He trailed off, searching for words. "Tonight was the most honest I've been in my entire life." Then he stepped back, the loss of contact physical and aching. He walked to the elevator without looking back, but Anne saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The elevator doors closed between them. Anne stood alone in the hallway, lips still tingling, heart racing, mind spinning. She'd just kissed William Moretti, her landlord, her employer, possibly the most dangerous man she'd ever met. And all she could think was, when can I do it again? Anne didn't sleep. She lay in bed watching shadows shift across her ceiling, replaying every moment, the kiss, the conversation, the raw vulnerability in William's eyes when he'd admitted he was terrified. Of you. Her phone buzzed at 2 a.m. A text from the same unknown number, now saved in her contacts as simply William. Still awake. Anne stared at the message, heart hammering. She shouldn't respond. Should establish boundaries, maintain professionalism, do any of the dozen smart things her brain insisted were necessary. She typed back, "Unfortunately. You." The response was immediate. "I haven't slept properly in 3 years." "Why 3 years?" A longer pause. Anne watched the typing indicator appear and disappear twice before his response finally came. "That's when my father died. When I inherited everything, every enemy, every consequence. Sleep feels like vulnerability I can't afford." Anne's chest tightened. She sat up, pulling her knees to her chest, phone glowing in the darkness. "That's not living. That's just surviving. Is there a difference?" "Yes. And you deserve to know that difference." Several minutes passed with no response. Anne wondered if she'd pushed too far, offered comfort he hadn't asked for. Then, "I'm outside your building." Anne's breath caught. She crossed to her window, peering down at the street 8 floors below. Sure enough, the black Mercedes was parked at the curb, hazards blinking in the darkness. "Why? Because I couldn't leave. I drove around the block 6 times trying to convince myself to go home." Anne's pulse raced. Every rational thought screamed this was too fast, too intense, too dangerous. But rationality had no place in whatever this was becoming. "Want to come up?" The typing indicator appeared immediately, then stopped. Started again. Stopped. Finally, "I shouldn't. I'm not asking if you should. I'm asking if you want to." The weight was agonizing. Anne pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, watching the Mercedes below. "More than anything. But Anne, if I come up there, I don't trust myself to be what you deserve. To be careful. To be—" She didn't let him finish. Called him instead. He answered on the first ring. "Anne, stop deciding what I deserve," she said quietly but firmly. "Stop protecting me from choices I'm capable of making myself. I'm not fragile. I know you're not fragile." His voice was rough, strained. "That's what terrifies me. You're strong enough to survive me, and I'm selfish enough to let you try." "Then be selfish." Anne's hand trembled against the phone. "Come up. We'll have tea. We'll talk. Nothing has to happen except 2 people who can't sleep keeping each other company." Silence stretched. She could hear his breathing through the phone, could almost feel the internal war raging. "Just tea?" William finally asked. "Just tea," Anne promised. "Unless you want more, but that's your choice, not an obligation." Another long pause. Then, "I'll be up in 3 minutes." He hung up. Anne's hands shook as she moved through her apartment, smoothing her sleep shorts and tank top, running fingers through her blonde hair, putting water on for tea, even though her kitchen was tiny and nothing like what he was probably used to. The knock came exactly 3 minutes later. Anne opened the door. William stood in her threshold looking utterly undone, tie gone, shirt partially unbuttoned, hair disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. His grey eyes were storm dark, desperate, fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "This is a mistake," he said. "Probably," Anne agreed. "I'm going to complicate your life beyond recognition." "You already have." "I don't know how to be what you need," Anne stepped aside, gesturing him in. "Then learn." William crossed the threshold like he was entering sacred ground, cautious, reverent, aware of the significance. Anne closed the door softly behind him. Her apartment was modest compared to his world. Second-hand furniture lovingly maintained, books stacked on every surface, art prints she'd collected from street vendors because she loved them even though they'd never be worth anything. William stood in the center of her small living room, looking completely out of place and somehow perfectly right. "Your home is—" He trailed off, searching for words. "Small?" Anne supplied. "Cluttered? Not up to your usual standards?" "Alive," William finished quietly. "It feels alive." The observation struck something tender in Anne's chest. She moved to the kitchen, desperate for something to do with her hands. "Tea? Please." She prepared 2 cups, hyper-aware of William watching her every movement. When she turned back, he was examining her bookshelf, fingers trailing over worn spines. "You've read all these?" he asked. "Multiple times. Books are cheaper than therapy." His smile was brief but genuine. I have an entire library in my penthouse. Haven't opened a book in years. They're just there. Expensive decoration. That's sad, Anne said softly. Most of my life is. William turned to face her fully. Expensive decoration masquerading as substance. Anne handed him a mug, plain ceramic, chipped slightly on the handle, nothing like the crystal he probably drank from. He took it carefully, their fingers brushing. The contact sent electricity through her. They settled on her small couch, close but not touching, both cradling their tea like lifelines. Tell me something, William said after a long silence. Something you've never told anyone. Anne considered. Deflecting would be easy, safe. She chose truth instead. I'm terrified I'll work myself to death and no one will notice, she admitted quietly. That I'll disappear and the world will just continue. That I don't matter enough to leave a mark. William's gaze sharpened. You matter. To who? To me. The words were simple, absolute. You've mattered since you called me a jerk. Since you looked at me and saw a person instead of a portfolio. Anne's throat tightened. That's just human decency. Which is rarer than you think in my world. William set his mug down carefully. People see me as a tool, a connection, a means to wealth or power or access. No one sees just William, the man who's tired and lonely and doesn't know how to stop building walls. I see him, Anne whispered. I know. His hand found hers on the couch between them. That's why you're dangerous. I'm not dangerous. You are. William's thumb traced circles on her palm, the same way he'd done at dinner, a gesture that felt intimate and grounding. You make me want impossible things, normal things, like sitting on a worn couch drinking tea and not performing power. Anne leaned her head on his shoulder, a risk that felt necessary. William went rigid for half a heartbeat, then relaxed, his free hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. Tell me about your father, Anne said softly. She felt William's entire body tense. For a moment she thought he'd pull away, rebuild his walls, shut her out. Instead, he started talking. He was brilliant, ruthless, built an empire from nothing through sheer force of will and strategic severity. William's voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone reciting facts to avoid feeling them. He taught me that weakness was fatal, that caring was leverage for enemies, that the only thing that mattered was control. That's not true. It was his truth, and it kept him powerful until the day he died, alone in a hospital room because he'd alienated everyone who might have visited. Anne tightened her grip on his hand. You're not him. I'm exactly him, William said bitterly. I just hide it better. No. Anne sat up, forcing him to meet her eyes. You're the man who warned me about being seen with you. Who's trying to do right by your tenants, even though it's harder than just raising rent? Who's sitting in my apartment at 3 a.m. being honest instead of performing power? She cupped his face, thumb brushing his cheekbone. You're the man who's terrified of becoming your father, which means you never will. William's eyes closed, his expression crumpling briefly before iron control reasserted itself, but not before Anne saw the raw pain, the desperate hope. I want to believe you, he whispered. Then believe me. When his eyes opened again, they were burning. Anne, He stopped, jaw working like the words were physically painful. What? She prompted gently. I want things with you I have no right wanting. Things that would complicate everything. Things that would put you in danger. His hands framed her face, achingly gentle. And I'm not strong enough to walk away. Then don't. Anne's heart hammered against her ribs. Don't walk away. Don't protect me from yourself. Just be here. If I stay, then you stay. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched. No expectations, no pressure. Just two people who can't sleep keeping each other company. William's laugh was shaky. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is. It's not. But his arms wrapped around her anyway, pulling her close until she was curled against his chest, his heartbeat steady and rapid under her ear. Nothing about this is simple. Okay, Anne murmured into his shirt. Then it's complicated. We'll figure it out. They stayed like that for hours, wrapped together on her couch, tea cooling, forgotten on the table, the city waking slowly outside while they existed in their own suspended moment. Anne felt William's breathing eventually slow, deepen. Felt the tension drain from his muscles as exhaustion finally overwhelmed vigilance. He was falling asleep, actually sleeping. For the first time in 3 years, he'd said. Anne didn't move, didn't risk waking him, just held him and let herself acknowledge the terrifying truth blossoming in her chest. She was falling in love with William Moretti, and there was no going back from that. Anne woke to sunlight streaming through her windows and an empty couch. For one disoriented moment, she wondered if she'd dreamed it all. The midnight texts, William at her door, the vulnerable confessions in the dark. Then she saw the note on her coffee table, written in decisive handwriting on her grocery list notepad. "You let me sleep. No one's done that in years, thank you. WPS. Your tea is terrible. I'm sending better." Despite everything, Anne smiled. Her phone showed 8 missed calls, 3 from her office, 2 from Mrs. Chen, 3 from unknown numbers. It was already past 9. She was late. Very late. Anne scrambled to get ready, her mind racing through excuses that didn't involve "my landlord, who I may be falling for, spent the night on my couch." By the time she reached the office at 10:15, her boss was waiting. "Clark, my office now." The tone didn't promise good things. Anne followed him in, pulse racing. Mark Stevens was generally fair, but had zero tolerance for unprofessionalism. Being 2 hours late definitely qualified. "Want to explain where you were?" Mark asked, settling behind his desk with crossed arms. "I'm so sorry. I had an emergency with William Moretti." Mark's expression was unreadable. Anne's blood went cold. What? "You were photographed with him last night, at Luciano's." Mark turned his computer monitor to face her. On the screen was a gossip blog Anne had never heard of. "Moretti's Mystery Blonde. Who is she?" The photo showed them leaving the restaurant, William's hand on the small of her back, Anne looking up at him with an expression that could only be described as intimate. The angle made them look like lovers, like conspirators, like something far more significant than landlord and tenant. "It's not," Anne started. "Save it." Mark held up a hand. "I don't care about your personal life. I care that our clients are now calling asking if we have connections to Moretti Holdings, if we're somehow involved in his business dealings. We're not. I'm not. It was just dinner. Just dinner, with one of the most powerful real estate magnates in the city doesn't exist, Anne." Mark's expression softened fractionally. "Look, I'm not judging, but you need to understand, association with Moretti comes with baggage, people asking questions, competitors wondering if they can use you as leverage." The word echoed what William had warned her about. "Being associated with me makes you a target." "I understand," Anne said quietly. "Do you?" Mark leaned forward. "Because this firm values discretion. We can't afford to be dragged into whatever business Moretti's involved in." "He's my landlord," Anne said. "He bought my building. We were discussing lease terms." It wasn't technically a lie, just not the complete truth. Mark studied her for a long moment. "Fine. But Anne, be careful. Men like Moretti don't do anything without agenda. Whatever you think this is, remember that." The words haunted her for the rest of the day. Whatever you think this is. What was this? A relationship? An arrangement? A complication waiting to explode? Her phone buzzed at lunch. "William, we need to talk." "Are you at work?" Anne's stomach knotted. "Yes." "Saw the photos. I'm sorry, I should have been more careful. Can I see you tonight? My building, the meeting." She'd almost forgotten the tenant meeting William had scheduled to discuss his renovation plans. "After. Please." Anne stared at the text. Every rational instinct screamed to establish distance, to protect her job and her life from the complications Mark had warned about. But she remembered William sleeping on her couch, vulnerable and peaceful. Remembered his confession about not knowing how to be real with someone. "Okay." After the meeting. His response was immediate. "Thank you." The community room was packed when Anne arrived that evening. Every tenant seemed to have shown up, from young professionals to retirees like Mrs. Chen. The air buzzed with nervous speculation. William stood at the front of the room looking every inch the powerful executive. Tailored suit, confident posture, expression carefully neutral. But when his gaze found Anne's across the crowd, something in his eyes warmed. Anne's breath caught. "Thank you all for coming," William began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "I know my acquisition of this building has caused concern. I want to address that directly." He launched into his presentation, the renovations he'd mentioned to Anne, the timeline, the minimal rent increases, locked for current tenants, moderate for new leases. He'd clearly prepared, answering questions with data and reassurance. But Anne noticed what others might miss. the slight tension in his shoulders when an elderly resident asked if he'd flipped the building for profit, the way his jaw tightened when someone mentioned his father's reputation. He was trying, really trying to be the better version he'd talked about. What about tenant input? Anne found herself asking. Will we have a say in the renovation decisions that affect our daily lives? William's gaze locked on hers. Yes, I'm establishing a tenant council. Anne Clark has agreed to serve as liaison between residents and my development team. Murmurs rippled through the room. Anne felt dozens of eyes on her. Why her? Someone asked. Not hostile, just curious. William's expression was carefully neutral, but Anne saw the ghost of a smile. Because she's the only one brave enough to shout at me when I'm wrong. Laughter broke the tension. Anne felt herself flush. The meeting continued for another hour. By the end, most concerns had been addressed, though skepticism remained. People filed out slowly, some stopping to thank William, others to voice continued wariness. Finally, only Anne and William remained in the empty community room. The silence felt heavy, loaded with everything unsaid. You did well, Anne said finally. I had good motivation. William loosened his tie, exhaustion showing through his controlled facade. Saw the blog post? And got a lecture from my boss about association complications. William's expression darkened. I'm sorry. I should have anticipated. Stop, Anne interrupted. Stop apologizing for being seen with me. If I'm making this choice, I'm making it fully. That includes dealing with consequences. Anne, your job is fine. Mark's just worried about optics. She crossed the space between them, suddenly desperate to close the physical distance. But he's not wrong. This, us, it's complicated. I know. William's hands found her waist, gentle but possessive. If you want out, now's the time, before this gets more tangled. Anne looked up at him, at the carefully controlled vulnerability in his eyes, and made her choice. I don't want out, she said. I want in, fully, whatever that means. It means people will talk, will judge, will assume you're with me for money or access or... Let them. Anne's hands fisted in his shirt. I know the truth. You know the truth, that's enough. William's forehead pressed to hers. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. Still haven't decided which? Anne smiled against his lips. No, I've decided. His thumb traced her jaw. You're brave, and I'm the fool for letting you anywhere near my disaster of a life. Good thing I like disasters. She kissed him then, slow and deliberate and full of choice. William responded with barely restrained hunger, his control fraying at the edges as he pulled her closer. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, William's eyes were dark with want and something deeper. Come home with me, he said roughly. Not for... I just want you there. In my space. Let me show you my world. Anne should say no. Should establish boundaries, move slowly, be smart. She said yes instead. William's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a gleaming high-rise Anne had passed 1,000 times without ever imagining what existed inside. The elevator required a key card. The doors opened directly into his apartment. No hallway, no threshold, just instant immersion into his world. Anne stepped out and stopped breathing. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped 3 walls, offering a 360-degree view of the city, lit up like a constellation of earthbound stars. The space was massive. Sleek furniture, dark wood, chrome and glass and expensive minimalism. Art that was probably worth more than her entire building hung on the walls. It was beautiful. It was also utterly soulless. It's not much, William said behind her, a trace of dry humor in his voice. It's intimidating, Anne corrected honestly. That's the point. He shrugged out of his jacket, draping it over a chair. My father taught me. Where you live is a statement. Power, success, control. Anne turned slowly, taking in details. Where's your statement? William frowned. What do you mean? This space. Anne gestured around. It's beautiful, but it doesn't tell me anything about William Moretti, the person. Just William Moretti, the empire. She watched realization flicker across his face, uncomfortable, revealing. I don't know who that person is, he admitted quietly. I've been the empire for so long, I forgot there was supposed to be someone underneath. Anne's heart squeezed. She crossed to him, taking his hands. Then let's figure it out. Show me something real in this place, something that matters to you, not to your reputation. William hesitated, clearly torn between ingrained privacy and the vulnerability she was asking for. Finally, he led her through the expansive space to a closed door she'd barely noticed. "No one comes in here," he said, hand on the knob. "Not my housekeeper, not business associates, just me." "Then why are you showing me?" His grey eyes held hers. "Because you asked to see something real." He opened the door. The room beyond was small compared to the rest of the penthouse, probably intended as a home office. But William had transformed it into something else entirely. One wall was covered in photographs, candid shots of the city at dawn, portraits of strangers caught mid-laugh, architectural details most people never noticed. They were stunning, raw and honest and full of the emotion absent from the rest of his space. "You took these," Anne breathed. "My mother gave me a camera when I was 12. William's voice was soft, distant. "She died 2 years later. Photography was the only thing my father couldn't control, couldn't turn into a lesson about power. So I kept it, hidden, like a secret rebellion." Anne moved closer to the photographs, seeing the city through William's eyes, vulnerable and beautiful and achingly human. "These are incredible," she said honestly. "They're indulgent." But there was no conviction in his tone. "They're human." Anne turned to face him. "This is who you are underneath the empire, someone who sees beauty, who notices the parts of the world other people ignore." William looked uncomfortable, like she'd exposed something he'd kept buried. "My father would have called it weakness." "Your father was wrong." Anne crossed to him, framing his face with her hands. "This, your art, your eye for detail, your capacity to see the world as more than just assets. It's not weakness. It's what makes you whole." She felt William shudder under her touch, walls crumbling in real time. "I don't know how to be whole," he whispered. "I only know how to be controlled." "Then lose control." Anne's thumbs traced his cheekbones. "With me. You're safe with me." The look in William's eyes was pure devastation, want and fear and desperate hope all tangled together. He pulled her close with trembling hands, like she was something precious and fragile he was terrified of breaking. "You undo me," he said roughly against her hair. "Every defense, every wall. You walk into my life and suddenly nothing makes sense except being near you. Then be near me." Anne's arms wrapped around his waist, holding tight. "Stop fighting it. Stop overthinking, just feel." William's grip tightened, his face buried in her hair, his breathing uneven. Anne felt the moment his control finally, truly broke, the subtle collapse of his shoulders, the way his hands fisted in her shirt, like she was the only solid thing in his universe. "I'm falling for you," he confessed into her hair, completely, catastrophically, "and I'm terrified." Anne's heart stuttered. She pulled back just enough to see his face, raw and unguarded and beautiful in its vulnerability. "I'm falling too," she admitted, "and yes, it's terrifying. But William, I'd rather be terrified with you than safe with anyone else." His laugh was shaky, disbelieving. "That's possibly the most foolish thing you've ever said." "Probably." Anne smiled through sudden tears. "But it's true." William kissed her then, deep and desperate and reverent, like she was salvation and damnation wrapped together. His hands cradled her face, thumbs brushing away tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. "Stay," he whispered against her lips. "Tonight, tomorrow, however long you'll give me." "William, I know it's too fast. I know it's complicated. But Anne, I haven't felt alive in years until you." His forehead pressed to hers. "Stay, please." Every rational thought screamed this was reckless, too soon, too intense. Anne ignored them all. "Okay," she breathed, "I'll stay." They ordered takeout from a place Anne suggested, nowhere fancy, just good food, and ate on William's obscenely expensive couch while watching the city lights flicker below. "Tell me about your mother," Anne said softly, halfway through her noodles. William was quiet for a long moment, chopsticks motionless. "She was everything my father wasn't. Warm, creative. She saw the world in colors, not profit margins. How did she end up with him? Arranged marriage, essentially. Her family owed his a debt." William's expression darkened. "She tried to make it work, tried to soften him, but my father only saw her kindness as leverage. I'm sorry. When she died, something in me died too, the part that believed love was possible in my world." He turned to face Anne fully. "Until you walked into my life shouting about parking spots and looking at me like I was just a man, not a monument." Anne's breath caught. "I did shout at you. Best moment of my year." William's smile was soft, genuine. You have no idea how refreshing honesty is when you're surrounded by calculated interactions. I'm always honest, sometimes too honest. There's no such thing. His hand found hers between them. Promise me you'll always be honest with me, even when it's uncomfortable. I promise, Anne said solemnly. But same goes for you, no hiding behind walls or control. If we're doing this, we're doing it real. Real, William repeated, like testing a foreign word. Then, okay, real. They finished dinner in comfortable silence, the kind that felt earned rather than forced. When Anne yawned for the third time, William stood and offered his hand. Come on, you're exhausted. He led her through the penthouse to his bedroom, a massive space dominated by a bed that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. Everything was immaculate, sterile, nothing personal. Except on the nightstand, Anne noticed a single framed photo, a young boy and a dark-haired woman laughing at the camera. His mother. I've never brought anyone here, William said quietly. To this room. This is mine. Then I'm honored. He pulled out clothes from his dresser, a t-shirt that would be enormous on her drawstring pants. Not exactly glamorous. Perfect, Anne corrected. She changed in his bathroom, all marble and chrome, and emerged to find William standing by the window, staring out at the city. He'd changed into pajama pants and nothing else, and Anne's breath caught at the sight of him. Lean muscles, the vulnerable curve of his spine, moonlight painting him in silver. William? He turned, and the raw need in his expression stole her words. I need to tell you something, he said, voice rough. Before this goes further, before you're in too deep. Anne's pulse kicked up. What? My father wasn't just a businessman. The Moretti name, it carries history. Connections to families that operate outside the law. William's jaw clenched. I've spent years legitimizing everything. Every business deal is legal, every contract clean. But the reputation remains. And people will assume that you're like him, Anne finished, connected to the syndicate. Yes. He watched her carefully. Does that change things? Anne considered. Really considered. The danger, the speculation, the complications. Are you like him? She asked. Are you doing anything off the books? No. William's voice was absolute. I swore I'd break that cycle. Everything I do is scrutinized, legal, clean. But the past doesn't disappear just because I want it to. Then I don't care what people assume, Anne said firmly. I care about who you actually are, and you're not your father's sins. The relief in William's eyes was profound. He crossed to her in 3 strides, cupping her face with reverent hands. How are you real? He whispered. I ask myself the same thing about you. They crawled into bed together, tentative at first, negotiating proximity, both hyper-aware of crossed boundaries. But when William's arms wrapped around her, pulling her back against his chest, it felt inevitable. Right. Thank you, he murmured into her hair. For what? For seeing me, for staying, for not running when every logical reason says you should. Anne laced her fingers through his. I'm not going anywhere. She felt William's breath shudder out, felt the last of his tension drain away. Within minutes, his breathing deepened, evened. He was asleep. 2 nights in a row, he'd slept with her nearby. Anne smiled into the darkness and let herself fall. Anne woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the smell of coffee. For one disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory flooded back, William's penthouse, his confession, falling asleep wrapped in his arms. She sat up, alone in the massive bed. Voices drifted from somewhere beyond the bedroom door. Anne padded out barefoot, still wearing William's shirt, following the sound to the kitchen. William stood at the counter in pajama pants and a t-shirt, phone to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian. His hair was disheveled, stubble darkening his jaw, and he looked devastatingly human. He saw her and froze mid-sentence. Whatever he was saying trailed off. The person on the other end said something sharp. Ti richiamo, William said. I'll call you back, and hung up without waiting for response. His eyes traveled over her, sleep-mussed and vulnerable in his clothes, and darkened with unmistakable want. Good morning, Anne said, suddenly self-conscious. It is now. William crossed to her, hands framing her waist. Coffee? Please. She leaned into his touch, savoring the easy intimacy of morning. Everything okay? Just business. He poured her a cup from an espresso machine that probably cost more than her car. How'd you sleep? Better than I have in months. Anne accepted the coffee. Perfect, rich, infinitely better than her terrible tea. You? William's smile was soft, wondering. Same. 2 nights in a row. I'm starting to think you're magic. Or you're just finally safe enough to rest. The observation made him still. Then he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. You're probably right. They stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together, the city waking up 8 stories below. Anne's phone buzzed from the bedroom. Probably work, probably her boss wondering where she was again. I should... she started. Stay, William interrupted. Call in. Spend the day with me. William? I can't just... You can. His hands tightened on her waist. I know it's selfish. I know you have responsibilities, but Anne, I need today. One day where you're mine and the world doesn't intrude. The raw honesty in his voice undid any argument she might have made. Okay, Anne whispered. One day. They spent the morning on his rooftop terrace, a space Anne hadn't even known existed. Plants everywhere, a small garden, comfortable furniture arranged to catch the morning sun. My mother loved gardens, William explained, pouring them both fresh juice. After she died, I couldn't stand to be in them. Too many memories, but a few years ago I decided that was letting him win, letting grief be stronger than memory. Anne curled up in a chair across from him, studying his face in the gentle light. So you built this. So I built this. He gestured at the thriving plants. Hired someone to maintain it. Haven't spent much time here, though. Always too busy with work. We should change that. We? William's eyebrow arched. If I'm staying in your world, I'm improving it, Anne said firmly. Starting with actually using this beautiful space your mother would have loved. Something in William's expression cracked. Grief and gratitude tangled together. She would have liked you. Yeah? She would have loved how you don't take my nonsense, how you demand I be better. His grey eyes held hers. She always said the right woman would be someone who challenged me, wouldn't let me hide. Anne's chest tightened. I'm not letting you hide. I know. William reached across the small table, lacing their fingers together. It's terrifying and incredible, and I don't know what I did to deserve you walking into my life. You were in my parking spot, Anne reminded him with a smile. His laugh was pure, unguarded. Best decision I ever made. They spent hours talking, about dreams abandoned, about fear of inadequacy, about the versions of themselves they'd hidden from the world. William told her about building his empire as armor. Anne confessed her terror of disappearing without mattering. You matter, William said fiercely. To me, absolutely. And Anne believed him. By evening, reality began to intrude. Anne's phone had a dozen missed calls. William's had more. We can't hide forever, Anne said reluctantly. I know. But William's grip on her hand didn't loosen. Doesn't mean I have to like it. They were curled together on the terrace couch, the sun setting in spectacular orange and purple, the city preparing for night. What happens now? Anne asked. With us. With everything. William was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know. I've never done this before, never wanted to. But you want to now. More than anything. He turned to face her fully. Anne, I'm not good at relationships. I'm controlling and complicated, and I come with baggage that could sink a cruise ship. But if you're willing to try, I swear I'll do everything in my power to be worthy of that. Anne's eyes stung. I'm willing. But William? You don't have to earn me. You're already worthy just by being honest. His kiss was soft, reverent. How did I get this lucky? I asked myself the same thing. They watched the sunset together, both aware they were balanced on the edge of something that would change everything. I love you, William said suddenly. I know it's too soon. I know it's probably terrifying to hear. But Anne, I'm falling in love with you, and I needed you to know. Anne's breath caught. Her heart hammered so hard, she thought it might burst. I love you too, she whispered, completely, even though it's reckless and too fast and probably insane. William pulled her into his lap, holding her like she was the most precious thing in his world. We'll figure it out. Together. Together, Anne agreed. 6 months later, the gallery opening was Anne's idea. You hide your photography like it's shameful, she'd argued one morning over coffee. It's time the world saw who William Moretti really is. He'd resisted, of course. Called it self-indulgent, worried about appearing weak. But Anne had been relentless, and eventually William had agreed, on one condition. The gallery would benefit a foundation for displaced tenants, all proceeds going to affordable housing initiatives. Now he stood in the sleek space, surrounded by his photographs blown up and framed, watching strangers examine his work with genuine interest. "They love it," Anne murmured, appearing at his side with champagne. "You're officially an artist." "I'm officially terrified," William corrected, but his smile was genuine. Marcus from Unit 714 approached, surprisingly dressed up. "Mr. Moretti, these are incredible. I had no idea you saw the city this way." "Most people don't," William admitted. "Well, I'm buying 3. Marcus grinned. "For my new place, thanks to the rent lock, I finally have disposable income." When he walked away, Anne squeezed William's hand. "See, you're changing lives, not through empire, through empathy." William pulled her close, not caring about the crowd. "I'm changing because of you." "No." Anne shook her head. "You were always capable of this. I just gave you permission to try." His kiss was soft, public, absolutely scandalous by his old standards. Anne melted into it, into him, into the life they'd built together against all odds. When they broke apart, William's forehead rested against hers. "Marry me." Anne's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me." His grey eyes were intense, certain. "I know we said we'd take things slow. I know this is fast. But Anne, I've never been more sure of anything. You're my home, my honesty, my heart. Marry me." Around them, the gallery continued humming with activity. But in their bubble, there was only silence, only possibility. Anne smiled through sudden tears. "You're supposed to have a ring for proposals." "I have something better." William reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph, one Anne had never seen. It showed her on his rooftop terrace, laughing at something off camera, sunlight catching in her blonde hair, joy radiating from every line of her body. "I took this the 3rd morning you stayed over," William said softly. "The moment I knew I'd never let you go, the moment I knew you were forever." Anne's hands trembled as she took the photograph. She looked happy, truly happy. "That's your proposal?" she managed through tears. "A photograph? That's my truth." William's thumb brushed away her tears. "I'm offering you my art, my vulnerability, every part of myself I've kept hidden, forever, if you'll have me." Anne looked at the photograph, at the evidence of love captured in a moment, and made her choice. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to forever." William's smile was blinding. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while Anne laughed and cried and held on tight to the man who'd started as her parking spot nemesis and become her everything. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I love you too," Anne replied. Around them, the gallery erupted in applause. Everyone had apparently been watching. Mrs. Chen shouted something in Cantonese that sounded like approval. Marcus whooped. Even the stuffy art critics smiled, and Anne realized this was her life now. Public, complicated, occasionally overwhelming, but real, so beautifully real, with the man she loved, the man she'd chosen, the man who'd chosen her right back. From a shouting match in a parking garage to a marriage proposal in an art gallery, their story was unconventional, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect.
Heart full of cracks, didn't believe in signs of fate until you stood right in my way. You looked at me like you already knew every wall I built, every truth I had to. I didn't plan to fall, didn't plan it all, but somehow you feel like home in a life I lost control. If loving you is fire, let it burn me whole. I didn't plan to fall, but I'm right where I belong. You talk like power, walk like storm, but when you're quiet, you're barely holding on. I saw the fear behind your eyes, a lonely king in his own crown. And when you touched my hand that night, everything wrong started feeling right. I didn't plan to fall, didn't plan it all, but somehow you feel like home in a life I lost control. If loving fast, but I'd rather risk everything than live in the past. I didn't plan to fall, but I choose you now. Through the noise, the fear, the doubt. If the world breaks us apart, I'll still find you somehow. I didn't plan to fall, but I choose you now. From a moment I tried to fight, you became my safest place to hide.